It's been said that by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. For Kingston's Fire Chief Mark Douglas and Kingston's Chief of Police Maurice Splaine, failure is not an option. Today we'll be sitting down with Chief Douglas and Chief Splaine to discuss Kingston's new emergency response plan and learn what you can do to prepare, stay safe, and help neighbors in need should an emergency situation arise. Chief Douglas, Chief Splaine, thank you both for coming on today to discuss this year's, or rather Kingston's new emergency response plan. Before we sort of jump into things, I just wanted to hear from both of you. I know you both grew up in Kingston. What kept you so close to home?
I think it was just a community. It's just a community I didn't want to leave. You know, I've always been here and plan on staying here.
Yeah.
I developed an interest in the fire department fairly early, 8, 10, 12 years old. And I used to hang around the fire station, and I really got just a feeling, like most said, of community. And it's a place I, as well, didn't want to leave. Felt it like it was home and wanted to keep it that way.
And how many years have you been on the department?
36.
36, and how about you?
I've only got 30.
Well, I invited you both here today to talk about our recently updated emergency response plan. But before we get started and really get into the nuts and bolts of community preparedness, Mark, I know when I talked to you earlier this week, you said that the community preparedness piece is huge, but it's really the individual preparedness that is where this all starts, and something that you really wanted to emphasize in your time with us today.
Exactly. The emergency response plan as a whole, or guideline, however you'd like to phrase it, is very important as a community. But individually, when you look throughout the nation at the disasters that happen with a hurricane, a tornado, or any of those storms, floods, whatever it is, an individual being prepared themselves, a flashlight, a kit that keeps them fed for 2 days or so, and some emergency supplies is their supply or their lifeline between the time the event happens and when we're able to respond to them or reach them. In winter storms, specifically in the Northeast, you see where somebody will get, I don't want to say trapped, but access will be restricted for a period of time. So that gives them some food, some water, and some other necessities to survive that short period.
Now, is there a general rule of how many days or how many hours you want to have stockpiled?
There's many general rules on that. Unfortunately, depending on the source, depends on how many days. I've heard up to a week. My thought process is 2 to 3 is reasonable for this area. Anything greater than that seems a little unrealistic from my current view.
And so now I know that there's over 60 years of experience here, right in front of me. But
that hurt.
But I'm guessing there was a much larger group that sort of drafted this plan. What did the process look like to create? Can I hold this up?
Sure.
So this is the emergency response binder. As you can see, it's quite in depth. What did the planning process look like to get this to where it is today?
The planning process involved initial conversations amongst myself, Chief Splaine, Highway Superintendent, and some other key stakeholders, primarily department heads, including the town administrator, as to how do we adequately plan for. We do well at responding to, but we really need to put a plan on paper, or at least a guideline on paper as to how we respond to these winter storms, particularly the advanced planning stages of that. So those discussions developed into a focus group or a working group, however you like to phrase it. We got together for several meetings and then took the information and documented it, is really that. And we'll continue to work with that. Council on Aging is currently working on a special needs list. We've done a bit of an outreach program with the 2 trailer parks, and we'll bring those forms back, review them, see how good that information was with regards to elderly and special needs, and then incorporate that into the plan. And in that way, we'll be able to make phone calls to them, check on them when these type of incidents develop.
Great. Now, I'm guessing that this isn't just winter storms. Can you give us an idea of sort of the breadth of what sort of disasters, natural or man-made, that this plan covers?
Its foundation is storms, per se, but any of those bits of information, guidelines, parameters, if you will, can be used for any disaster. If you use, for example, in Lexington several years ago, they had gas explosions, much like they just had in Lawrence and that general area. And what you do is you just pull the storm component out and you use the sheltering component or whatever it is, module or component that you need to use for that particular event.
Okay. Great. And Chief Splaine, where does your team and yourself sort of fit into this whole emergency response plan?
Well, basically, the way I look at the plan, it's kind of like a before, during, and after storm thing. And it's the after storm that we spend the most resources trying to get back to some type of normalcy. And basically, the police station is kind of like the junk drawer in your kitchen that everybody has. And if anybody has a question or doesn't know what to do or what the answer is, they call us and expect the police department to fix it. It could range from cars being stuck to when's my power going to be restored? Could you check on our neighbor? We just do a whole plethora of things during especially after the storm.
Great. So we're looking at the long-range forecast. It says we have 36 inches of snow coming, severe coastal flooding. What do the days look like for the two of you leading up to a weather event like that?
Planning days. That's really what they look like. I think you probably agree. It's key to look at long-range forecasting. Massachusetts MEMA specifically is excellent at providing very early advisories on weather.
And I'm sorry, MEMA is Massachusetts
Emergency Management Agency.
Okay,
yeah, MEMA. Is very good at providing advanced weather advisories. So as soon as we get those, we start the planning phase of that. And that's really what the days in advance of a storm our planning days. We have a meeting, we go through what's incorporated into the manual, our workflow and our pre-storm checklist, which includes meetings, notifications, reaching out for information, making sure that your liaisons to your utilities as well as MEMA and FEMA are up to date and accurate so that you can call them during the emergency. Those are the types of things we do in the days before, preparing our chainsaws and equipment and all of that stuff from our perspective.
So, so that's sort of the long-range forecast is telling us there's a storm coming. How does, I guess, preparing for or reacting to, rather, a disaster differ when it's something like what we did just see north of Boston in Haverhill and Andover?
I think it really takes the planning phase. In terms of storms, you get that advanced advisory. You don't with that type of disaster. So it takes that planning phase or that ability to plan out of it. But each of our departments have standard operating procedures that we used for emergencies such as fires and so forth. And we just use those in place of the planning phase, essentially, to extinguish the fires or respond, use mutual aid. And then what would kick in for something like the Lawrence gas explosions would be the sheltering component. That would kick in very quickly after the hazards were mitigated, the fires were put out.
Sure, sure. And in the event of a disaster, man-made or natural, where should residents be turning? I know you said that folks call and it's sort of that like junk drawer, as you said, and it's, can you check on my neighbor? Can you, help me, my car's stuck? Is there a general area or a news source that residents can turn to for updates in the event of a disaster?
Blackboard Connect, which is what a lot of people still call reverse 911, is our best way to communicate right now. It goes to cell phones, it goes to pagers if you had one, emails, all electronic media. And we have access to that, at least I do certainly, from the mobile data terminal in my car, as well as any of the computers at the station. Dispatch would have access to it, Chief Splaine would have access to it. So we can put out messages very quickly and they have a broad range. They reach many people. So that is our best. Secondarily, we're still considering Twitter accounts, Facebook, town-based, rather than individual or personal-based information going out, along with a PIO, Public Information Officer, to manage that information.
And do we have a PIO identified for Kingston as part of the new plan?
We have a PIO description. The idea of, pardon me, the idea of the plan or the PIO component is not to assign it to one person for two reasons. One, that person during a long duration event is not always going to be awake. The second is if that person were on vacation or something, you want a plan or a task that can be given to anyone, most anyone, a little training is required, to be able to conduct that and be successful.
Sure, and if somebody's watching and they're not currently on the reverse 911 list because they have a cell phone, they don't have a landline, what have you, how can they get their phone on that list?
Go to kingstonmass.org, the town website, click on Blackboard Connect at the bottom of the screen or lower on the screen, and it will walk you through the process to sign up.
Great. That's wonderful. I know I'll be doing that after this because I don't actually think my cell phone's on the reverse 911 list. And in the event of a power outage, in the event of a roof collapse, anything like that, if residents need a warm place or a safe place, Where are our shelters?
Primary shelter is Silver Lake Regional High School. That's primary because it's the largest facility. It has generator backup. It has kitchen facilities. It is a regional Red Cross shelter. We've partnered with the Red Cross for both of our shelters, and they will support that, provide supplies. We do have a stockpile as well as at the high school currently, as well as a trailer at the Pembroke Street Fire Station that have disaster supplies readily available. The secondary shelter, and I'll explain why we have two, would be the senior center. For an example of the Lexington explosions a few years back, they had just a couple of streets that were affected, 3 or 4 actually, and they still wanted to have school. So when you take the high school out of the equation, you can't have school. For a smaller incident like that, say we had 15 or 20 people, the senior center makes more sense and it still allows the superintendent to have school.
And those shelters are staffed by town employees, by volunteers?
Red Cross volunteers is how it's planned.
Great, great. Now, Chief Splaine, I feel like this has happened more frequently, or at least in my memory more frequently. In recent years, we're told, the roads are really bad, stay off the roads. When those warnings are given for a flood or for a snowstorm, can you just give a little bit more information about why that advice should be listened to? Because I know that when a driver goes out, they put themselves at risk, they put your police officers at risk, and Paul Basler's team at risk. But what's some general advice in the event that we're advised not to go out on the road?
Well, usually you're putting that warning out for a particular reason, for your safety, the officer's safety. Sometimes we put that out because there could be concerns of flooding, down in the Rocky Nook area or down the Ardena or Landing Road. There are other times it could be due to high amounts of snow or strong winds. Last year in a couple of the storms, we had so many trees that were coming down. They were actually isolating your fire trucks and police cars in areas because they couldn't respond. They got trapped. So if we can't get to you, then you're kind of putting yourself in harm's way. Last year during some of the storms, when the officers and firefighters were isolated, they were without a means to go anywhere for about an hour sometimes, because you're now waiting for the electric company to come down, make sure if any lines are down that the lines aren't live. You're waiting now for tree crews to come and remove trees that have now blocked the roads. In fact, it was so dangerous last year, I know both myself and Chief Douglas removed our staff from the streets and said, stay in the station until the worst of this storm is over. So, you can't, make yourself basically a victim.
Yeah, yeah. And it must slow down the process tremendously when you have more cars out on the road that are skidding, that are stuck, that are surrounded by water.
A lot of times too, the heights of the storm lately have been at night. So you have unknowns out there. You just can't see what's in front of you. You've got the visibility that's cut down because of the snow. You've got trees that are down on the road, and it's just not safe. So when we tell you to shelter in place, stay home, there's a reason for it. Just do it.
Yep. Now, I'm really excited that we have this binder, that we have this plan, that you're both sort of at the helm, driving the process. Can you think of or pinpoint a storm or an emergency that's happened in the past where this, or a tool like this, would have just been, invaluable?
I think we've always had, plans, and they just modify, based on the knowledge of a particular storm. They're always evolving. After the storms, we'll have after-action sessions, and we'll talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, why we may have to adjust things. So again, it's always a work in process. We've, always, like I said, had a plan in place. This is just now involving regionalization and the Red Cross.
Yeah, the importance of the plan can't be overstated. To have a document there that any one of my deputy or his lieutenants could pull out and just scan through it. We've been so deeply involved in it. So much of it is committed to, quite frankly, memory. But to have that plan so that anybody can pull it out, I say anybody, any of the staff can pull it out and just go right down the checklist and know everything they're supposed to do pre-storm and generally post-storm, during the storm. But I can't say that it replaces good, solid management decisions, whether it's Chief Splaine, myself, Superintendent Basler, or any of our staff. I mean, that's a book full of guidelines, but it's really up to the staffs to go out and implement the plan, make good decisions, and make it all work.
Great. So knowing now that this is based on years of experience and what's worked and what doesn't work, this isn't etched in stone. This is something that's going to be, I guess, flexible, and it'll storm by storm, year by year. This is something that will continue to take form.
Well, every storm is different. Sometimes it might just be a windstorm, in the summer, a hurricane. Other times you've got the wind coupled with snow. So every storm is a different challenge, and then after the storm, it's basically when you're making a lot of the decisions you wouldn't, if you're, sitting at home, think that we have to make. It's like, where do we tell Eversource is our primary objective for restoring power? And it's things like, geez, we got to make sure that, Rocky Nook gets their power back, first, because they have a lot of grinder pumps on the sewer system, and they need to be able to flush their toilet. So that becomes a priority. There are other times you want to make it the senior parks that are the priority, because power's been out for a long time, and you want to make sure that the seniors get their heat back. Or if you've got the high school as the shelter, you want to make sure that the roads are open so people can get to the shelter. Each storm is different, and you've got different obstacles that you're dealing with each time.
And we sort of touched on this earlier, but you said that there was a survey going out at the COA, and you've been in touch with the two different parks. If somebody's watching and they aren't a user of the COA and they don't live in one of those communities, is there a way to notify you of any special needs if they have oxygen?
Well, the idea behind this was we were going to pilot this program and these forms, get them back, review them, see if we need to make changes, and then put them out on a widespread basis. So once they come back, we'll get a good view of how we did with them. And they're primarily special needs forms that you fill out anything that you need, a special need or a handicapped, if you will, so that we know to respond to you in a storm on a special basis versus just an average citizen. You may need some additional help, in other words. So if you're interested in filling one out and you don't live in one of those, call the Council on Aging, and Paula will get you a form.
Sure, and I'll make sure that we can put that number up at the bottom of the show so that folks have that right in front of them. One thing that I wanted to chat about too, this came up, I forget if it was at a capital planning committee meeting or at a finance committee meeting, but there was a discussion about the importance of the townhouse as sort of this epicenter of activity in the event of a disaster. And I think myself included, I just always assumed it would be the police station or it would be a firehouse. In the event of an emergency, like the ones that we've been discussing, can you just explain, as you did at that meeting, sort of why the townhouse is such an important piece of this plan?
Sure. Not as much during the storm. The emergency response teams, police, fire, highway, et cetera, are really the core responders during the storms. The town hall is really the recovery phase. You'll need building, obviously, if you have damage, you'll need to see the building inspector, and all of the departments that work within that town hall, for one reason or another, should be available to you or to the townspeople in the event of a major disaster and a recovery effort. So that's why I was so emphatic that building should maintain a generator and be available to the public post-storm or post-disaster, so that we can accomplish that recovery effort quickly.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that too, I thought immediately of the gas explosions and how it's the building inspector, it's the planner, it's really every Board of Health as well, having that place to work out of and making sure that they can sort of triage the community from that one central location.
I have a very strong feeling that our buildings should have generator power. God forbid the town hall was affected by the disaster. What would be your alternate location? So if you have options, it's very helpful.
Now, if folks are watching at home and there's one thing that you want them to sort of get from this episode, what's one or two really solid pieces of advice if there is an emergency this winter or in the future?
Individual preparedness would be be prepared. Have your storm kit, your emergency kit. There's two resources, redcross.org and ready.gov. That you can get some very good guidelines on storm preparedness, personal storm preparedness, and my highest priority would be to say, please do that.
And I would just say, make sure that whatever you're going to do, you're safe. Whether it's if you have a generator, that you don't run it inside your house, that it's properly ventilated. Same thing with your furnaces, that you make sure that they're ventilated. Make sure that you charge your cell phones, your iPads, so that you have the ability to communicate, especially in this day and age when everybody relies on a cell phone and not a copper line. That's your lifeline. Make sure that you go to the store prior. The chief was talking earlier about being prepared, but make sure you buy things like cans of tuna fish and peanut butter and sandwiches, sandwich meat, stuff that you can eat that doesn't require cooking. If it's going to be a long-term recovery, maybe make sure that you get gas for your car, because if there's no power, you can't pump gas at a gas station. Be prepared that way, and also, fill up propane tanks. So if you need to cook on your grill, you just got to be prepared. Use flashlights, not candles. It's a lot of common sense.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's a number of incidents and emergencies that you field in the event of a storm that's related to the storm, but not directly related. Like somebody has a candle and then there's a fire. Somebody doesn't properly ventilate, the space where they're using a generator, and that's a different call for you.
Very different. Carbon monoxide is a very serious issue with people running generators. As the chief said, you've got to make sure that you do these things carefully. Many people are not used to running generators. They seem to be, with the number of storms we've had, a little more used to them, but you want to make sure it's distance from the building, that it's not the exhaust discharging into the building, or you can create all kinds of issues with the best intention of trying to help your family.
And I look forward to having, I think Adam Hatch is going to work with me in the future to talk about some other preparedness things unrelated to emergencies, so changing your CO2 alarm batteries and fire batteries. So, so that'll be a fun project to work on with him. So before we wrap, folks are at home, they're watching, they're making this checklist of ways that they can be prepared to keep themselves safe, to keep their families safe. Is there a way for somebody to get involved and actually be on the response side, the recovery side? And if so, how can they put themselves in a position to not only help themselves and their family, but to assist others in the community?
This poster should be, or flyer rather, should be running on PAC TV. That we're going to post it. This coming weekend, we have a volunteer weekend at the Kingston Fire Department at 105 Pembroke Street. So if you go on PAC TV or the website, and you can see the Red Cross flyer and make that phone call, sign up. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there'll be volunteer training. And they'll be able to become a Red Cross volunteer. And that's just not for our Kingston shelter, but they'll be able to expand to many things within the Red Cross if that's their choice to do so.
Great. And in the event that this airs after that training, I do hope that folks see this on PAC TV and circulating online. Will this training be offered again in the future for anybody?
Will. The training will be offered again in the future. And not only at this location, but there are other locations they offer it. It's standardized training. The location is really unimportant as to where you take the training, whether it be Rainham, Brockton, wherever they go, it's very similar training. So if we had some volunteers that did see this, people that wanted to volunteer and saw this after that weekend, they could certainly volunteer and go to another training. Fantastic.
Well, I thank you both for coming on. I thank you both for all the work that you're doing in the community, for the plan that you've worked on to keep us all safe. And I'm very happy that we have it, and I hope that we never have to open it.
Well, the other thing I just want to emphasize is if we do open a shelter and invite the public there for safety, just make sure that you bring necessities with you, that you're going to make sure you bring your medicine, your food, bring your dog, your cat. We have provisions to care for your animal as well. So don't feel that you have to stay home, because of an animal. They too can be provided for, at the shelters. And basically one of the things the Red Cross emphasizes is that basically the shelters are what they call a lifeboat and not a luxury liner. So make sure that you bring your own, entertainment, if you have, blankets, whatever, pillows that you need. Just make sure you again, be self-reliant, So,
yep. That's very important. I'm glad you brought that up. I'll have a go bag ready in the event.
Well, exactly.
In the event that, yeah. Well, thank you both again for coming on.
Thank you.
I'm really excited for this. I'm excited for the town of Kingston to have the two of you in the positions that you are, doing the work that you're doing, and again, I'm glad we have the binder, and I hope we never have to use it.